thought I'd share a bit about my trip to Jamaica and the psychedelic-assisted therapy session. So, as you know, I got there a couple days early. I had planned to get there, to settle in. Like, preparation is super important on these kind of things. And so, to chill out and meditate and acclimatize to the culture. And so I did that. I got in on a Tuesday evening, a Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, all to myself at the resort. A Friday was picked up by the retreat folks. There was a doctor and a therapist and someone else who had been doing training up until now to be the guide. So there were three of those folks. And then there were three of us who were doing the training, myself, another social worker from the States, and then a psychologist who was based in Jamaica who was very interested in the work as well. So we all got taken back to this villa that they had rented, which is really cool. Kind of had its own courtyard with a pool, and then, like I guess something you find at Airbnb. That evening we did some training initially, and then we did, which is, I think, quite standard in like clinical trials, a microdose, which is a very, very tiny bit of psilocybin. Like, I think it turns out to often be like 1/20th of an actual dose that you might take for the journey. And you do that, what they shared was you do that obviously to kind of just see how your body responds, like maybe the strength of it. Do you have any reactions, which aren't, very common anyway, but I also thought it was a way to kind of just introduce yourself to that, particularly people who haven't done a lot of this, either recreationally or therapeutically. There's a lot of like thinking and thoughts and anticipation and everything like that can go on. And so I think that notion of going through the process at least once of the unknown and what's going to happen, even though it's not a strong thing, is super helpful too. So then we did that. We talked about it a little bit. We had some dinner. We kept, so this whole time we're kind of bonding and connecting. And then they shared the agenda for the next day, which would be 3 people would be journeying, and then 3 people would be their guides, facilitators, sitters. Those terms are kind of used interchangeably. And they also had, which was really lovely, like some folks who lived locally that were there supporting the work. So they worked as what they call floaters. So even though we're there kind of as a group, we each had our own individual session in a distinct place around the property. And so a floater was there in case like someone needed water, or because the guy didn't want to, it's not really, you shouldn't leave someone alone who's journeying in this kind of situation. So we had a couple local folks who were really great and helpful and supporting everything that was going on that day. So we woke up on the Saturday, we had some more training around this stuff. And then around 12, we started doing preparation, which included, short meditation, kind of a sage burning, and just kind of grounding, kind of transitioning from the training work and just starting to prepare to drink the tea. And the psilocybin was prepared into tea. Prior to that, we met with the person who was figuring out dosage. And this was different from my last experience. It was very specific that the person journeying, they decided, like, this is what I want. And obviously there was a conversation and a dialogue of how much, but that other time I did it in more of a shamanic tradition. There was a conversation, and then it was like kind of the person deciding what they thought would be a good dose for you, which is also helpful because we're not all experts on the different strains of psilocybin and how much to take. But I was pretty clear on mine that I wanted what's called like a heroic dose or hero dose, which is kind of at a level of like, setting the intention to kind of really let go and do some kind of deep work. And so I had 5 milligrams. I think the other folks were anywhere between 2.5 to 3.5. afterwards I found out we had a couple different strains. I had kind of a strain called penis envy. And because we got a little behind in drinking the tea, because we were still doing some, a couple people pulled like a tarot card before their journey to just kind of get us, open up the possibilities of the experience and things like that. And so the tea had been made and we were running a little behind, and like the person who prepared, the psilocybin was like, it's been stewing and we should probably get to it. And we would later kind of realize, and I guess we knew ahead of time, that the longer that the tea will steep, particularly if it's made with lemon, that lemon breaks down the psilocybin to the active ingredient. And so what normally can be kind of 30 to 45, sometimes up to an hour onset time, in my situation, and at least one of the other person, within 10 minutes, we were off to the races. And I had decided that the time that I had the experience before was really more out in nature, and it was in a group setting. And this time I set the intention that I was going to try to have as much of kind of a clinical setting as possible, which meant I decided to set up in my bed, in my bedroom at this villa. The guide had a chair, was sitting there. I had the what do you call them, eye blinds, and then also had music being pumped in, which was a soundtrack for this kind of psilocybin psychedelic journey. It all started coming on pretty quickly, so there was a little bit of, I wouldn't say panic, but anxiety that I wasn't ready. It was all happening, and I thought I was going to sit and meditate for a little while, but it soon became very clear that, like, lie back, put your gear on, and let's go. And so we did. It was very visual at times in the early parts. So, when you close your eyes, obviously you see kind of kaleidoscope and things like that. When you open them, like, at least for me, the bedding and the shingles on the roof or whatever, things were like in motion and moving. And and the music was really transformative and really supportive. Like, one of the other people in our group, I've chosen just noise canceling headphones, and so that's a different experience. One of the people decided to go out in nature and was in a chair, like a lawn chair that was in kind of like a hut, but all the windows were open. And so, set and setting, which I've talked about before, incredibly important. Like, what's the physical environment? What's, everything around you? Like, the set part is like the mindset. What do you bring into it? Is there anxiety? Is there ease? What's your relationship with the person who's sitting for you? The guide, which is incredibly important. Yeah, and what dose and stuff like that. So I won't go into all the details of like the therapeutic side of my experience, but suffice to say it was incredibly deep and incredibly substantial and powerful, and at times quite painful, like psychologically, emotionally. But it always felt like very cathartic. It felt like things were being processed, things were being moved through, things that I was aware about that I know of through my own therapy and my own kind of awareness. But to feel them like experientially, not to know them, to think them, but to feel like it, just, I don't know, like, the idea of psilocybin is that you're opening up the pathways in the brain. And so instead of your normal kind of cognitive, these grooves that are kind of in the brain about thinking about the way you always think about things, or emotions that tend to always come up, this is kind of like pulling it all apart or pulling it all back and allowing like more parts of your brain to kind of communicate with each other. And some examples for me, or some situations, these were parts of my unconscious that I had that felt very, very young, that felt from like a long, long, long time ago, that maybe again there might have been some thinking awareness around it, but like I felt like fully plugged in and in connection with that and what it meant. And there was also this sense of like, I don't know if it's going to sound woo-woo, but I was dropping in this question from time to time, is like, why am I needy? Like, why do I need the things that I need? Sometimes it's a little like, why do I need to be seen and validated from others? Like, why does it kind of like, it has at times and can at times kind of rule my emotions a little bit, or at least my thinking process. And so as I would have this experience and kind of floating around and do different things, I would keep bringing myself back to that question, and the medicine would kind of show me more, more of the story behind that. And some of that story, I had a very strong impression came from like, not just me, came from like, obviously, and my relationship with my parents, but how they were raised, and possibly, I mean, that's as far back as I experienced it, but the sense of this kind of like flowing river, if you will, of like causes and conditions that start with, generations back, and that informs how people parent, and that informs how people share love and ask for love and have their needs met. And then you learn that as a child, and then, or your parents learn that as a child, and then that informs like how they show up as a parent, and then that's what I inherit. And so one of the things of why am I this way? Why do I need these things the way that I need? It became clear it had nothing to do with me in some respects. It's just something that like, they call it epigenetics, this kind of like encoding of emotional or psychological kind of things that you inherit along the way, and maybe some of it's actually encoded in DNA, and so that was very freeing in a lot of ways. That like this identity that I can sometimes have around this stuff is not actually, even parts of me. I mean, it's parts of me, but it's like this, I'm downstream from it, if you will. Maybe that's the way to think about it from that river metaphor. So I got bits of that, like from my mother's side. I was exposed to, which I've done a lot of work on, and then exposed to more like on my dad's side, I think of the, that part of it. That was really kind of eye-opening. And so the first 2 hours was just a lot of that, like being exposed to like, I don't know, some of like my own trauma or experiences and generational trauma and experiences that inform some of the things that I was hoping, I set the intention to look at. And then what became clear like 2 hours in was like this question, but this comment just kept coming up for me, which is, and then what? Okay, I have all this information. I can see that this part, some of the stuff that it definitely is mine and has really just occurred in my lifetime, and some of the experiences that I've been through and some of the things I've overcome. And then also that there's this inherited piece that comes from, my parents and how they raised me and how they were probably raised. And so I'm getting all of this information, I'm getting all of this intensity and all these emotions. And then it was just like, yeah. And not that was all of it. I think there was maybe more to be seen, but what started to come up, it was like, okay, and then what? I mean, what do we do? What do I do with this? And immediately I was like, I took all the gear off, and, and along the way, I stopped for, I stopped like, but it's, it's a journey. I stopped for something to drink and had a little bite to eat to like gain energy during this 2 hour period. And my guide is always there, steadfast, super responsive, never directive, like never like, well, what about this? Or should you do this? Or what was that? It's all like waiting, for what I might come up with and what I might share. But anyway, like at the end of the 2 hours, I immediately kind of took this stuff off, for the last time. And my guide was like, hi, what's going on? I was like, I need to go outside. And so, stumbled a bit, but got myself together. And it was just this immediate feeling that and then what was like, I didn't need to be alone in a room and kind of, I was in under covers because it was kind of air conditioning. And I felt like, very internal and finding out all this information. And what came up was like, okay, and then what? It's like open up and like be connected and show up in the world and be close to nature. That was the big thing, because it was this beautiful property. So I got helped outside, and I didn't know where I wanted to go. I should have thought about that ahead of time. We talked about like, if you move, maybe think about where you want to move to. And I hadn't. So at some point I just plopped myself down in the middle of the grass. And and that was nice. It felt like, oh, okay, yeah, this is what's next. It's like being connected, being in nature, letting it go. I don't even know. But it quickly became clear it was not sustainable for me to be sitting there on the grass like that. I was kind of rolling around and a little muddy. And so when my guide had caught up with me because they had gone to get a sheet or a blanket or something for me to sit on, I was like, oh, this isn't sustainable. So we moved to a lawn chair, a patio chair by the pool. And at that point also, I did this thing which, I don't think I normally would have done. I just felt compelled to take my shirt off. Like it was even having that fabric on me felt like not enough openness and freeness and connectedness. So I laid back in the chair. The music was just like, I can't imagine having that experience without it. It was incredible. It may not be everybody's taste, but it's, from what I can tell and what I understand and what I experience, this kind of music is produced to be supportive of journey. So it's got both happy and maybe somber kind of notes and elements to it. Some people find that it has some feminine energy or some masculine energy, but it's definitely a journey. It's not all like up, and it's not like obviously very super sad, but it takes you there. And my sense was like the parts of my conscious mind that were still kind of present and there, they were preoccupied a little bit with the music so that like the unconscious parts could really like just come to the forefront, and the music was kind of also a part of that. But anyway, I get back out to the chair, and the music had ended or shifted or whatever, and so I at that point put on a playlist, some music that I like personally, that I listen to sometimes when I have massages or just kind of being out in nature, and just sat there for about, I don't know, maybe 15, 20, 25 minutes, kind of like just opening up and just being there and having this other kind of experience. And then I start to drop in and be a lot more conscious and aware. And then this is when like the guide, your connection with the guide becomes like really important, because you start talking, you start sharing. And all along the way, like a good guide is documenting everything, either writing it down or typing it, like what you say, nonverbal things like your body movement and everything like that, because obviously you're not going to remember everything. And so when you're at this stage and you're starting to process and integrate, again, it's very non-directive. They kind of like, I was just kind of rambling on about some of the things that had come up and what they meant to me. And there were times when the guide would like pose a question or like, do you remember saying this or whatever? And I was like, oh, and that would open up. And so in total, there was probably a third hour that involved like going out into nature and this processing that began. And then really, I mean, it's quite interesting as quickly as it begins, it's kind of, it's kind of like the return has happened and you're kind of back. And but the great thing about this environment was the integration just kind of continued, both one-on-one with my guide. And then what was really sweet is like the three of us who had journeyed, and then the three guides and the one or two floaters, we were all inhabiting the same space and kind of sharing, and we sat down to eat. And so there was also this kind of integration of sharing my individual experience with others who had their own individual experience. And that was really nice. And people shared like some funny things and some really challenging things. And yeah, I mean, and that kind of continued on into the evening, like when we had a meal at night, and there was still kind of sharing and things would come up, and it's like, oh yeah, I wrote down, you said this, and and then you shared this, and later on we'd get notes back, like some of those notes actually that were written up or were shared with us. And then so the next day, I switch roles. Like I sat with one of the people that were there that doing the training, that they were journey, and they offered like their journey for me to sit and do the training. So I got to be the guide, and which was super helpful, having gone through the experience before and all the studying and research I've done to kind of get to witness somebody else's journey, which is, as you can imagine, everyone is completely unique to the person. And one person might have two completely different journeys if they did it twice. So I won't say too much about that experience, just because that's someone else's journey, but I learned a lot. I felt I did a pretty good job of being a guide and supporting them. And then the whole process about integrating with them would happen throughout the rest of the day in the evening. And we had another training in that morning as well. And then all along, there are these just ad hoc conversations about the experience and what it meant. And it felt like things just kind of blossomed even more, like the more you shared and the more you heard of other people. It started filling in, I think psilocybin in particular, the notion is that it makes the unconscious conscious. But then, like, what are you going to do with that? Like, that's why, I mean, recreational use and exploratory and spiritual use, I mean, it's all incredibly valuable. But for this kind of work in particular, I think if you're working around like some intention around emotional or psychological well-being, the preparation, obviously one side of it, maybe I sound like a broken record, but the integration is incredibly valuable. And it's not just like an hour afterwards. Like, I've been integrating that experience since I've had it. Like, I did another thing on when the training was over, I decided to stay in Jamaica an extra like 36 hours because I just wanted to keep letting it settle in, and before having to come back to like, obviously real life and airports and craziness. And so I spent a full day in Montego Bay, some time on the beach. At one point before I left the retreat, I want to mention this was incredibly valuable. I put the headphones back on. I played the playlist that I'd done the whole journey on with psilocybin, and I sat in front of my laptop and I just typed stream of consciousness. And that was the morning after. And I felt so much of what I felt then, like between the music and just kind of another way of processing and integrating, not just like verbal thoughts of just allowing it. Highly recommend that. And if you're up for it, like one of the other people was like, there's no way she could have gone back to that stuff so soon afterwards, but me. Let's go there. So that was really great to listen to the playlist again and do a different type of processing on my own. So it's been interesting. I've been back now a couple days. Been back at school and classes. I've been talking about it. It's very similar to also coming back from a long retreat. There's this wanting to share the experience, and then there's also like, I think what happens is something sacred. Even if it's not a spiritual kind of journey for you, it's a sacred experience. And so I do try to be thoughtful about how I talk about it because I want to honor the experience, and I don't want to kind of like over narrate it and create something from it that's coming out of my conscious thinking now that necessarily maybe wasn't coming out of that unconscious exploration at the time, if that makes sense. So, I'm excited and loving to talk about it and share about it. And I'm also trying to be intentional about that. If that makes sense. So, that's a bit about my journey and my training to sit in psychedelic-assisted therapy around psilocybin. I recommend the experience to people, and also I think it shows up and it comes to you in its own way. So if you're kind of curious but you have some hesitation, like, that's okay. Don't try to push it. Just keep allowing and keep doing research, if you will, or hearing stories and finding out more about it. And it will come to you, I think in its time. And I think that's really important if you talk about preparation. Like, when you're ready, you're ready. And then so the experience is informed by that being ready, as opposed to like pushing too hard or too much resistance or whatever might come up. So, thanks for like listening to that. I hope it wasn't too long and drawn out. And it also just represents parts of it, I guess, for me. And I just want to say that the experience was incredibly fulfilling, incredibly beautiful, incredibly challenging, and the people I met along the way, I feel connected to them now in some ways. Whether I ever see them again, I feel connected to them forever. And I'm incredibly grateful for, the privilege and the opportunity to be able to do this work, because it's not available to everybody. And that's about it. Bye.